Elizabeth, a literary princess. If you're new here, welcome. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists. I love books and I love talking to people about books, so here we are. Today I have a video on, gotta lift it up, rereading the Chronicles of Narnia as an adult. And I'm putting these back down because they're really heavy. Oh, I did a similar video on rereading the Twilight Saga as an adult last summer, and I had a really good time with it. So I decided to take the opportunity of the event Remember December to reread the series. Remember December Rereadathon was an event all about rereading, and it was hosted by Anne from Anne Novella, Elizabeth from Bookings and Books, Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, Erin Facer, Ollie from Criminolly, Roz from Scally Dandling About the Books, and Shelley Swearingen. Thank you to all of them for hosting such a great event. And yes, it was Remember December. It was in December. It's February. It's fine, okay? I had a lot of thoughts that needed to, be thought and put together. So here we are in February talking about December. It's fine. So if you're somehow unfamiliar, The Chronicles of Narnia is a children's fantasy series written by C.S. Lewis and published between the years 1950 and 1956. For a little bit of background on my history with the series, I was given the first two books, The Magician's Nephew and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, for Christmas of 2005. I was 11 years old and the new movie of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was just coming out. My aunt felt that I should read the books before seeing the movie. So as you can see, maybe, the numbering on the series has The Magician's Nephew as book 1. And this is where everything goes downhill. So, duh, I started with The Magician's Nephew because it's book 1. However, The Magician's Nephew was not published first. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was published first in 1950. The Magician's Nephew was not published until 1955. So, second to last. So, little me is like reading The Magician's Nephew, and I was really struggling. I was not getting into it. I say little me, like I was 11, that's not that little. No, it's little. My nephew's 11, that's little. Yeah, I was not getting into it. I was like, where am I? Who are these people? What is happening? What? And so I did not finish The Magician's Nephew, much less The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, before my parents were like, let's go to the movie. I was like, okay. And then we got to the movie. And I absolutely fell in love. I'm gonna put these down and I'll pick them up later. Fell in love with the movie. And yes, this might have had a little bit to do with having a crush on Skander Keynes, who played Edmund in the movies. 11-year-old me thought he was super cute, but it's also just a great movie. And so from there, I was like, yeah, let's... Finished off The Magician's Nephew, was like, meh. And then read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and adored it. And so I went out and started buying the rest of the series and reading through them, still in the numbered order that's on the books, which puts The Horse and His Boy as the third book, even though it's actually the third to last to be published in 1954. And all of this stuff about the publication order and the chronological order is gonna be important. Bear with me. So as an adult, I have reread The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and also Prince Caspian, which is the second published book, but the fourth in the numbered order. I have revisited those two as an adult, But I had not revisited the rest of the series, although I have watched the Voyage of the Dawn Treader movie a few times, so I felt pretty familiar with that story. The rest of them, no, it was like gone. And I didn't realize how gone it was until I started reading The Silver Chair. And I was like Gandalf in that scene in Lord of the Rings. I have no memory of this place. So, as a result, several of these books count for the prompt to reread a book that you have basically forgotten because gone. It was just gone. So another one of the prompts was to reread a book differently from how you read it the first time. And I think this is like really referring to the format, like read it on audiobook if you read the print book or something like that. I played with this a little bit and decided that instead of reading it in the numbered order, which is considered the chronological order, so The Magician's Nephew in the timeline of Narnia takes place first. Instead, I decided I'm reading these in publication order because I honestly think that my first experience with this series was screwed up by starting with The Magician's Nephew. I don't think it's meant to be first. Now, apparently, C.S. Lewis gave his blessing to this reading order in a letter to a fan who was asking about it. The fan liked the chronological order. His mother liked the publication order. C.S. Lewis said he agreed more with the chronological order. And that is what the publisher, HarperCollins, has decided to run with. That's how they've numbered it. And you know, sometimes authors are just wrong about their own books. And Mr. Clive Staples Lewis was just wrong about this, in my opinion. Maybe not in your opinion. In my opinion, no, definitely wrong. I think reading it in the chronological order was a mistake. Publication order all the way. I'm going to be referring to this multiple times throughout the video and my reasoning for why I feel this way, which is why I'm giving you all of this up front. So, we are going to jump in. Do note, there are going to be spoilers for the entire series. So if you have not read Narnia and don't want to know what happens, you should leave now. All right, let's jump in. So we start off with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This is set in World War II England, and it follows the four Pevensey siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, who have been sent away from their home in London due to the air raids, and they are staying at the country house of Professor Kirk. While they're there, Lucy discovers a wardrobe that leads into the magical land of Narnia that is inhabited by fauns and talking animals and dwarves, and where it is always winter but never Christmas due to a spell by the White Witch. So Lucy's siblings don't believe her at first, but they eventually do all go through the wardrobe into Narnia, and they go to meet the Lion Aslan, who is the true ruler of Narnia, and they help him defeat the White Witch. They then rule as kings and queens for years before happening to go back through the wardrobe to find themselves back in England. No time has passed, and they are once again children. I loved this. What can I say? I loved this. It was 5 stars when I read it at 11. It was 5 stars when I revisited it in like 2016 or 2017. It was 5 stars now. It's 5 stars. I actually started crying a little bit with the first sentence, which like the first sentence isn't even anything. Like, once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. Like, it's not anything. And there's me like, just because of the nostalgia and like this feeling that I got of being like 11 years old again and just being so excited for this story. So yeah, you might think I'm crazy. My husband definitely thought I was crazy, but it's fine. I feel pretty much exactly the same way about this that I felt when I first read it. Love it. Edmund is my favorite character. He has been my favorite character from the beginning. Does this have more to do with Skander Keynes than the actual character of Edmund in the book? Yes, possibly. Again, can you blame 11-year-old me? He was cute. But I also do like that he's not perfect. He's the one that screws up. He betrays his family to the White Witch and, like, nearly ruins everything. He's kind of a rat. He's mean to his sister, and he's just like a jerky little kid. And I find that way more relatable than I find the other children who are much more perfect. Now, I do love Lucy. Lucy is the youngest, and she's very sweet and just so willing to believe in magic. I do love her. But relatable level, Edmund. Peter and Susan really, like, their characterization is they're the oldest of the siblings. Peter's the eldest and brave. Susan's the eldest daughter and kind of like hesitant and gentle. And that's their characterization. The characterization of the characters, like, there's really just not a whole lot. It's pretty sparse. Very basic, but I don't know. I still love them. So, you know. So let's address the publication order issue first. This is so obviously meant to be the first book. Like, it is so obvious. We are discovering Narnia with the children. Lucy's wonder and awe at walking through this wardrobe and then never reaching the back and coming out into a snow-filled forest with a lamppost. It's our wonder and awe. We are discovering it with them. We are finding out magic is real with them. There is a quote that makes it very clear. So they are at this point with the Beavers, and Mr. Beaver says, they say Aslan is on the move, perhaps has already landed. And now a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment the Beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. Perhaps it has sometimes happened to you in a dream that someone says something which you don't understand, but in the dream it feels as if it had some enormous meaning, either a terrifying one which turns the whole dream into a nightmare, or else a lovely meaning, too lovely to put into words, which makes the dream so beautiful that you remember it all your life and are always wishing you could get into that dream again. It was like that now. At the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump in its inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by her. And Lucy got the feeling you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it is the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. It's so clear. This is meant to be your first introduction to Narnia. This is where you are meant to meet Aslan. They didn't know him any more than you did. So you're not supposed to know who Aslan is at this point. Which, if you've read The Magician's Nephew first, you do. So that's my soapbox, is that it shouldn't be read in the order HarperCollins has it. Because this should be the first book. Always. Always, always. I do also want to address the Christian themes within this book. So, Lewis was a Christian. He wrote pretty extensively in his nonfiction about his faith and about various theological things. And this series as a whole has a lot of Christian themes. And some of the books are more obvious than others. I would say The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is one of the most obvious. In my opinion, I think there are some people who read it and were like, oh, I didn't even notice. But I think if you are familiar with the story of Jesus and his death and resurrection and all that, it's pretty clear. So Lewis always insisted that it wasn't allegorical, but like, sure, Clive Staples, it's not allegorical. Aslan is just, a figure that sacrifices himself, even though he is blameless, for the person who has betrayed everybody. And then because he has done that, he ends up rising again from the dead to defeat evil. But no, it's not allegorical at all, Clive Staples. Sure. Some people really like this. Some people don't like it. Some people don't really care. I myself am a Christian, so I'm fine with it. I actually find a lot of it quite touching, and I like Lewis's theology in some of these, particularly in the last battle. There's some stuff that I really liked just from a theological standpoint. I need to read some of his nonfiction and see how he handles faith when he is not writing about a children's fantasy world. But I'm on board with it. Some people are totally not, and I get that. Philip Pullman literally wrote an entire series as the atheist response to the Chronicles of Narnia. And you know what? That series is his Dark Materials. I love that series too. Basically what I'm saying is your mileage may vary. The last thing I really want to talk about with this one is them returning home at the end, which is like literally one chapter, a very short chapter. And that one little part about them growing up in Narnia and being kings and queens and then coming home to England and being children again has inspired so many other writers. Understandably so, because the entire idea of that is so traumatic. Imagine living a life, being a king or a queen, ruling a country, going into battle, and then you come home and you're 10 years old again. And everyone's treating you like a 10-year-old. And like your opinion doesn't matter. And you're not allowed to do anything without your parents' permission. The idea of that is so traumatizing. And it has inspired multiple writers. Shannon Maguire addresses a lot of these issues in her Wayward Children series, which I love the idea of pairing some of those books with the Chronicles of Narnia and reading them to a child and talking about those issues. Another one is Laura Weymouth's The Light Between Worlds, which is also set during World War II, and it happens after the children have returned. It has actually inspired me. I have a fictional project that I am working on, kind of off and on. By working on, I mean I think about it a lot. It's like playing as a movie in my head, but do I write much of it down? Sometimes. But yeah, so The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe has inspired me as a writer, and it's inspired a lot of other people as a writer. I think that's so beautiful. So, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. 5 stars, love it. Next up, we have Prince Caspian, which in our world is 1 year after the children go through the wardrobe. But in Narnian time, which runs very differently, it has been thousands of years. So Narnia is completely different now. It is ruled by the human Telmarine people, and what's left of the old Narnians, the talking animals, the dwarves, the tree spirits, they are living in hiding. We meet Prince Caspian, who is the son of King Caspian, who is the Telmarine king that is ruling Narnia. But his father dies, and his uncle Miraz becomes king instead of Caspian becoming king. And Miraz really wants to deprive Caspian of his birthright. It's very Hamlet, because we find out Miraz killed Caspian's father. It's very, very Hamlet. And so Caspian flees because his uncle attempts to assassinate him. And he falls in with the old Narnians, and they take up a campaign against Miraz. And the Pevensey children end up returning to Narnia to help. And they do, and Caspian becomes king, and everything is restored to rights. I like this book. It does not come close to touching The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for me, but I still really liked it. I ultimately gave it 4.5 stars. The structure is kind of strange. We start off for the first 3 or 4 chapters with the Pevensey siblings. And then they meet up with the dwarf Trumpkin, who proceeds to, for like 4 or 5 chapters, tell them the story of Caspian. So it's like we're playing catch up the whole time. And then, like, at the halfway point of the book, they meet up with Caspian and we have the whole, fight. So it's just kind of weird, and I'm not in love with it. But, you know, it's still the Pevensey siblings. It's still Narnia. I still really enjoyed it. The one thing that I really want to talk about in this book is the way that their memory works upon returning to Narnia. So, because, of course, that's something that inspired me from the first book and how I feel it would be traumatizing. They are not traumatized. That's not something Lewis ever really addresses, how upsetting the entire thing would be. But when they're back in their own world, it seems that Narnia kind of fades a bit. They still remember it, but it's more like a dream or something that happened so long ago. It's very distant in their minds, so that they're not thinking about it all the time. And based on the small amount that we have at the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it seems that that's kind of how their English lives seemed to them when they were growing up in Narnia. Like, they didn't really remember it. When they return to Narnia in Prince Caspian, their memories come back very slowly. They land on the island where their castle Cair Paravel is, and they don't recognize it. I mean, the landscape has changed. It was never an island originally. It was a peninsula. But they're in the ruins of their own castle, and they don't realize it until they start finding, like, their gold chess pieces. And they're like, oh, we had one like this. And then they're like, I think this is ours. So it's a really interesting way for it to work. And Lewis never really addresses it again in the rest of the books. It's just kind of like, oh, yes, you know, they were talking of Narnia. It's never addressed again. But their skills that they learned in Narnia, they don't have when they're in England. Like, Lucy was able to swim when she was growing up in Narnia and grew into an adult queen. But when she came back to England, she couldn't swim. When they return to Narnia, their skills kind of slowly start to come back. So the boys remember how to use their swords. Susan remembers her archery. But it's not immediate. It's so fascinating. And I wish that Lewis had done more with it. I get, like, it's a children's series and we just want to get to the plot, but I find it so interesting. I wish it was addressed more. So I liked Prince Caspian. Not as good as the first book. It was never going to be as good as the first book. We'll get to the Voyage of... We now get to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It doesn't really say how long after Prince Caspian this takes place in our world. In Narnia time, it's a few years. Caspian is now an adult young man. But Edmund and Lucy have gone to stay with their aunt and uncle, and we are introduced to their cousin, Eustace, or as Lewis introduces us to him, there was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. You speaking from experience there? Clive Staples with names that are just not great? Maybe. So the three children are drawn into Narnia through this painting of a ship on the ocean, and they find themselves on the Dawn Treader, Prince Caspian's ship, and they are sailing with several others that they know, including Reepicheep the mouse, who we are introduced to in Prince Caspian. And they are on a journey to go beyond the Lone Islands and see what's there and see if they can find these 7 lords that Caspian's uncle Miraz had sent away because they supported Caspian's claim to the throne. I had always thought this was my second favorite in the series. That's how I remember it being when I was a kid. Now, I still like this. I still gave it 4.5 stars. However, until the very end, it was really more of a 4-star read for me. And that's largely because of the structure. This is very episodic. Like, they go to an island, something happens, it gets sorted, and then they leave for the next island. Much more episodic than the other books, which I wasn't in love with. Not my favorite. But two things pulled it away from being 4 stars and putting it up to 4.5. And the first is Eustace. This kid, what a character. Okay, if there's no character development really with the Pevensies, Eustace just gets all of it. He's such a little shit. He is the biggest brat you have ever seen. He complains. He is like, he's like, get Reepicheep out of here. He's disgusting. He's like, Edmund and Lucy are stupid, and this whole thing is not real. And when we get back to England, he's such shit. Honestly, if my heart did not belong to Edmund, probably largely because of that crush on Skander Keynes, Eustace would probably be my favorite character because he really pops out. And we get his diary entries for some of this, and he's such a brat. He also has this great character arc of becoming a better person. He's being particularly dreadful on one island, and he ends up finding a dragon's treasure hoard. He falls asleep on it after taking one of the bracelets, and he turns into a dragon. And he starts to realize, oh my god, I've been horrible. And Aslan has to come and transform him back into a boy, and it's great. It's a great moment, great scenes. It's obviously meant to be this idea of a non-believer converting to Christianity because Eustace is like convinced. He's like, no, this isn't real. He's like standing in Narnia. He's like, this isn't real at all. We're gonna be back in England soon. But he then comes to believe in Aslan and believe that it's all real. And he starts to become a better person. He's still not perfect, though. We see him in 2 more books, and even after the dragon incident in this one, he can still be a little brat sometimes. But he's working toward being better. So he still has his moments, and there's a few moments in various places where Lucy will be like, oh, don't be a beast, because he's being a jerk. But he's trying, and he's becoming better. And I love that, instead of having just perfect children, because Peter and Lucy are kind of perfect. We do get a little bit of Lucy having some temptations in this book, which I appreciated. But I like more character growth and development like that. So, Eustace. Yes. The other thing is that at the end we get Aslan's country. So the group sails to the end of the world. And at that point, they're told that Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace, and then Reepicheep are the only ones to go on into Aslan's country. Or to the very edge of the world where it meets Aslan's country. And it's been like established through the whole book that Reepicheep is now an older mouse. And he's had this prophecy that he will see Aslan's country and the end of the world, or the edge of the world, excuse me. The end of the world has very different connotations around here. So, the whole thing is very beautiful. It is emotional. Let me get you the page. Coming like up to this beautiful place, it's gorgeous, and there's like a beautiful smell, there's beautiful music. And it says, Edmund and Eustace would never talk about it afterward. Lucy would only say, it would break your heart. Why, said I. Was it so sad? Sad? No. No one in that boat doubted that they were seeing beyond the end of the world into Aslan's country. At that moment, with a crunch, the boat ran aground. The water was too shallow now for it. This, said Reepicheep, is where I go on alone. They did not even try to stop him, for everything now felt as if it had been fated or had happened before. They helped him to lower his little coracle. Then he took off his sword. I shall need it no more, he said, and flung it far away across the lilied sea. Where it fell, it stood upright with the hilt above the surface. Then he bade them goodbye, trying to be sad for their sakes, but he was quivering with happiness. Lucy, for the first and last time, did what she had always wanted to do, taking him in her arms and caressing him. Then, hastily, he got into his coracle and took his paddle, and the current caught it, and away he went, very black against the lilies. But no lilies grew on the wave. It was a smooth green slope. The coracle went more and more quickly, and beautifully it rushed up the wave's side. For one split second, they saw its shape, and Reepicheep on the very top. Then it vanished, and since that moment, no one can truly claim to have seen Reepicheep the mouse. But my belief is that he came safe to Aslan's country, and is alive there to this day. Beautiful. Beautiful. So yeah, there's that. There is that. Yeah. That's all I have to say about that. Voyage on the Dawn Treader. I gave it 4.5 stars. We get to the Silver Chair. This is set basically one school term after the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Eustace has gone back to his school, and apparently he's not been such a terror as he used to be. And him and his schoolmate Jill Pole are brought into Narnia to rescue Prince Rilian, who is the son of Caspian. Caspian is now an old man. Rilian has been missing for years. As we find out as we go through the book, he has been taken by the Lady of the Green Kirtle, who is a witch in a similar vein to the White Witch. And she has put him under a spell so that he doesn't know who he is except for 1 hour each evening. And he is mostly kept underground. She is planning to use him to rule Narnia. So when Jill and Eustace arrive, Jill pushes Eustace off a cliff. Yep. And then Aslan comes to her and was like, that wasn't great. She's like, no, it wasn't. So he gives her 4 signs and he says, tell these to Eustace immediately and make sure you follow the signs. It will make your journey a lot easier. And naturally they muck up all the signs except the last one. So their journey's a rough go. They end up traveling with Puddleglum, who is, what is he? Puddleglum is a marsh wiggle. Okay. They travel with him trying to find Prince Rilian. And they do. They defeat the Lady of the Green Kirtle. It's all okay in the end. But they do rather muck it up spectacularly. This has become my second favorite in the series. And I think that for me, it comes closest to capturing the feeling that the original book gave me. It doesn't quite get there. Nothing was going to get there. But it comes close. I know that a lot of people don't feel the same way. I know people that didn't like this book at all. So again, your mileage may vary. I gave this 4.5 stars. So this is like the first book that I was just like, I have no memory of this place. But as I was reading, I did start to realize I have seen the 1990 BBC series of it. And now I can only remember certain scenes, and I remembered them as I got to the scenes. There's a scene with the Parliament of Owls, and there's a scene with the giants, and I remember those. And now this was shown to me before I had ever read the books. And I'm like, why did we start with the Silver Chair? Because BBC definitely did The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And I'm like, my parents are over here starting me with the silver chair. Okay. I kind of vaguely remember watching it and just being like, what? What is happening? Because I had no context for it. So that was a choice. I don't know. I didn't remember anything of the actual plot. This book actually contains my favorite quote of the entire series, which I'm going to read to you. And it's a very religious moment. The Lady of the Green Kirtle is trying to get them to think that Aslan's not real. There is no world above. There's nothing. And Puddleglum, who is quite a funny character. He's like very pessimistic, but like also optimistic at the same time. It's very interesting. But he says, I'm a chap who always liked to know the worst and then put the best face I can on it. So I won't deny any of what you said. But there's one thing more to be said. Even so, suppose we have only dreamed or made up all those things. Trees and grass and sun and moon and stars and Aslan himself. Suppose we have. Then all I can say is that in that case, the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But 4 babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. That's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. So thanking you kindly for our supper, if these 2 gentlemen and the young lady are ready, we're leaving your court at once and setting out in the dark to spend our lives looking for overland. Not that our lives will be very long, I should think, but that's small loss if the world's as dull a place as you say. So this is just really a comment on having faith. And I love that quote. Again, your mileage may vary if you are not religious. I don't know. I don't know your life. But I love that quote. It really struck me. Utterly fantastic. So, The Silver Chair, 4.5 stars, second favorite of the series. We now get to The Horse and His Boy, which is very different from the other books in the series. We do not follow children who have come from our world, and we actually move back in time. This is set when Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are kings and queens of Narnia, and it actually takes place not in Narnia, but in the neighboring country of Calormen? Look, I'm trying with these pronunciations. I'm kind of making it up as I go. So we are following this boy named Shasta, who runs away from his adopted father because his adopted father was about to sell him into slavery to a lord. And Shasta escapes with the lord's horse, who it turns out is a talking horse of Narnia named Bree. And they decide they're going to set out for Narnia because Narnia is a free country and Calormen is not. So as they are traveling, they meet up with Aravis, who is the daughter of a lord who is fleeing an arranged marriage with her own talking Narnian horse, Hwin. So they are traveling together. They also run into Edmund and Susan, who are in Calormen because the prince is courting Susan. They are accompanied by Prince Corin of Archenland, an ally and neighbor of Narnia's, who looks suspiciously like Shasta, like identical. I wonder where that could be going. It's a bit of a Prince and the Pauper thing, except it turns out they're actually twins. I have complicated feelings about this book. And we're going to talk about the issue in a minute because it's like one issue and it's a big issue. But I did ultimately give this 4 stars because I had a really good time when I could not ignore the big issue, but kind of be like, okay, yes, this is here, but what else is here? I actually think the plotting of this book is really good. So I gave it 4 stars. Also, I really like the talking horses. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Wow, racism. So Calormen is pretty obviously based on the Ottoman Empire, ancient Persia, and India. So yeah, it's not great sometimes. So all of the Calormen, I don't know, people, all of them are dark-skinned. The men wear turbans. They've got a very strict caste system. They keep slaves. They have a polytheistic religion. And then we've got that against the Narnians and the Archenlanders, who are all fair-skinned people who, like, they're always like, Narnia is a free country, and they've got their one god, Aslan. Yeah. And then we also have this scene, like, the Calormen people are made to look pretty ridiculous. There's this scene of their king, the Tisroc, with his son and then the Grand Vizier, and it's basically just slapstick comedy. And it's pretty not great. Every time the Tisroc is mentioned, the people always say, may he live forever. It's not great. It's Orientalism. Here you go. It's Orientalism. Plain and simple. It's uncomfortable. Okay? And I'm like, yep, it was the 50s. It sure was the 50s. There are positive aspects to the Calormen culture. Calormen culture. They are wonderful storytellers. Their food is top-notch. And these things are mentioned, but even then it's all still very stereotyped in an uncomfortable and negative way. My other thing with this book is that it's like completely removed from the main plot of the series. Like, you could take this book out of the series and it really would not affect the main plot. Whereas if you took the silver chair out, it would affect the main plot. If you took Prince Caspian out, it affects the main plot. If you take the magician's nephew out, which we'll talk about in a minute, that affects the main plot. This one, not at all. None. However, it does get us very, very attached to the talking horses of Narnia. And that, I think, is key for a scene in the last battle. And is also why The Horse and His Boy should be read third to last, so that you read it much closer to the last battle and have these talking horses fresh in your mind. We'll talk about that when we get to the last battle. I will also say it's fun to get a glimpse of Susan, Edmund, and Lucy as kings and queens. Peter is off doing something. He's not there. I don't know. But we see the other 3. And that's kind of fun because we don't really get much of that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We get a quick scene of them hunting and then they're back through the wardrobe and their children again. So it's kind of fun to see that. So, not my favorite in the series. Very conflicting feelings about it. But not my least favorite in the series either, because we'll come to that. I still liked it. 4 stars. Right, The Magician's Nephew. We now go back even further in time to the Victorian period, and we meet Diggory Kirk, who will grow up to be Professor Kirk, who owns the house that the wardrobe is in. And he has a neighbor, Polly Plummer, and the two of them become friends. Diggory's mother is dying. While that is happening, he and his mother are staying with his aunt and his uncle in London. The aunt is taking care of the mother. His uncle is a magician and just kind of stays locked up in his room all the time. And it turns out he has created these rings that allow you to travel to the wood between worlds, which has all these portals in the form of like pools of water that will take you to different worlds. So they go to one world called Charn, and there Diggory awakens Queen Jadis, who will become the White Witch. And she returns to them She returns with them to London and wreaks utter havoc. So they're trying to get her out of there, and they try to bring her back to Charn, but they bring her to Narnia instead. And in Narnia, Aslan is just creating it. So we see the creation of the land and all of its inhabitants, all the talking animals, the dwarves, everything. I liked this much better than I did the first time I read it, mainly because I'm reading it where it's supposed to be read. I gave it 4 stars. It's still not my favorite, but it's not my least favorite either. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. So let's talk about the publication order issue again. This is so clearly not meant to be the first book. This is how it opens, okay? This is a story about something that happened long ago when your grandfather was a child. It is a very important story because it shows how all of the comings and goings between our own world and the land of Narnia first began. I'm sorry, what's Narnia? What comings and goings? Where am I? Yeah, 11-year-old Elizabeth was like, where am I? And that's understandable because this book was published 5 years after the first book. It's assuming everybody has already read the other books before. If you haven't, then you're like, what's a Narnia? And none of it makes any sense. And then you get to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you're like, but I do know Aslan. Just publication order is superior, and I will now get off my soapbox for the final time. I also think that thematically, it helps to read The Magician's Nephew right before the last battle. So I'm thinking about this from the fact that it is a children's series. You're probably not reading them all right in a row to your child like I did as an adult. I didn't read them all in a row as a child. I had to, go to the store and get the next one. If you read this one first, then it's like, whoosh. And this has the creation of Narnia, whereas the last battle has the destruction of Narnia. But this also has the destruction of Charn and some kind of foreshadowing. And I don't know, I would feel like if I were to read this to a child first, and then we have 5 other books between that and the last battle, they might not really be connecting it, because I don't think I connected it. So I think it's better. This is one of the more obviously Christian ones. It's the Genesis creation story. We actually get 2 moments where Diggory is tempted the way that Adam and Eve are tempted. The first is in Charn, when he wakes up Jadis by ringing a bell. He rings the bell. Polly's like, don't ring the bell. He's like, I'm gonna ring it anyway. I want to see what happens. Bad things happen, Diggory. Bad things happen. And so it is literally all his fault that evil comes into Narnia. So he has to make up for that by going to the kind of edge of the world of Narnia and going into this garden and taking an apple from the tree. And the apple is going to be planted in Narnia to be the tree of protection. And there he is tempted again because he's tempted to take an apple for himself or to give it to his dying mother because he thinks it might heal her. And Jadis, the White Witch, is in the garden. She sneaks over the wall and steals a fruit and eats it, which gives her a horror of it forever. So it's like the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You eat it and then you're like, whoa. And things are not the same and not great anymore. And she tries to get Diggory to eat it as well, or to give it to his mother, but he doesn't. He's like, nope, not doing it. Bring it back to Aslan. So he fails the first time, he succeeds the second time. So it's not a direct allegory, but it's definitely there. What's really interesting about this book is that we actually have kind of some comments, and we get to know Lewis's feelings about the World Wars. So Lewis lived through both World War I and World War II. He served in World War I, and in World War II he wanted to serve, but they wouldn't let him. So he ended up taking children who were being evacuated out of London and into the country. Sound familiar? Yeah, some inspiration here. So he had feelings about the atomic bomb, and they make it into this book. I will read you the quote. This is actually another really lovely passage. So they're in the wood between worlds, and they are looking, and there's like this little place where there was a pool, but now it's all dried up. "When you were last here," said Aslan, "that hollow was a pool, and when you jumped into it, you came to the world where a dying sun shone over the ruins of Charn. There is no pool now. That world is ended, as if it had never been. Let the race of Adam and Eve take warning." "Yes, Aslan," said both the children. But Polly added, "But we're not quite as bad as that world, are we, Aslan?" "Not yet, daughter of Eve," he said. "Not yet, but you are growing more like it. It is not certain that some wicked one of your race will not find out a secret as evil as the deplorable word and use it to destroy all living things. And soon, very soon, before you are an old man and an old woman, great nations in your world will be ruled by tyrants who care no more for joy and justice and mercy than the Empress Jadis. Let your world beware." Heavy, very, very heavy, very ominous. And especially considering the world we live in now, like, I'm kind of glad Lewis didn't live to see any of the bullshit that was going on in the rest of the 20th century or the 21st century, because he would have been pretty horrified. So it's very sombering. It's something I did not pick up on as a child at all. So 4 stars for the Magician's Nephew. Let us move on to the last battle. So for the last battle, we move back to the main timeline, but we start in Narnia, not in our world. And it has been a very long time in Narnia. I'm not sure entirely how many years in our world it's been. It seems like it's been at least 1, possibly more. So we start off with an ape and a donkey. The ape is named Shift, the donkey is named Puzzle, and they find a lion skin in the river. And Shift is very manipulative, and Puzzle is very easily manipulated. And Shift dresses up Puzzle in the lion skin and parades him around as Aslan. And he uses the influence this gives him to basically bring in the Calormene people and let them start taking over Narnia. And they enslave the Narnian people and are cutting down the trees, killing the tree spirits. So the king, who is a descendant of Caspian and Rillian, his name is Tyrion, he tries to put a stop to it, but he gets captured, and then Eustace and Jill are brought into Narnia to try to help. However, despite their best efforts, the world is destroyed. Narnia is destroyed. Everyone dies. So this is probably my least favorite of the series. This was pretty much a 3-star read at the most through most of it. And the only things that really saved it we'll talk about later, but the big problems for me were A, there's more racism, and B, the children from our world don't come in until halfway through. And I think that really hurt this book. However, the ending saves the day and made this a 4-star read because of how touching I found it. So this book is freaking dark, first of all. Now we start to get some darkness in The Horse and His Boy. Arvis tries to stab herself because she wants to get out of the arranged marriage, and she only stops because Wynn starts talking. Other than that, that book is quite lighthearted. Obviously, we get a little more somber in The Magician's Nephew with the destruction of Charn and this warning about the possible destruction of our world and the things that are to come. This just kills everybody. Like, I'm not even kidding, they all die. So my camera battery died, and I had to wait several hours for it to charge up, and also I had to go to an appointment. So it's a few hours later now, and the camera angle might be a little bit different, and everything, but we're just gonna finish this off so close to the end too. Anyway, we were talking about how dark the last battle is and how everybody dies at the end. So yes, the Narnians all either die in the battle or are kind of herded out of Narnia by Aslan and things that he sets in motion. So those who were true to Aslan go through a door into Aslan's country, and those who were not, we don't talk about that. And then our children from our world die as well. In their own world, there is a train crash, and they all die. Except Susan, who is no longer a friend of Narnia, apparently. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. So, yeah, there's nothing lighthearted about this book. This book is pretty depressing. However, there is like this sense of hopefulness at the end because they are all in Aslan's country now, which it turns out is the real Narnia. The former Narnia was just like a prototype, and now we are going to be here forever. And here's how the book ends. I think this is another really beautiful quote. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now, at last, they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. So it does end with this hopefulness, and I guess that, along with the emotion that I felt over literally everybody dying, is kind of what saved this book for me and brought it up to 4 stars, when really it was probably more of like a 3-star read, if even that before. But, you know, if you get me crying, then I'm more likely to up the rating of the book. And I was crying. My husband was like, "Are you okay? You're reading Narnia." Like, they all die. He's just like, okay, because he's never read them. So it's definitely dark. I'm like, is this really a children's book? Kind of not, but there is hopefulness at the end that I guess made it okay for me. Let's talk about the racism because it gets even worse than it did in The Horse and His Boy. So we have the Calormene people once again, which means we have their stereotypes once again. They're the bad guys in this, really. So, you know, we see a lot of them doing bad things. Their god Tosh makes an appearance, and he is pretty violent and terrifying. And yeah, there is a Calormene man who was in the army, who was very devoted to Tosh and did good things in Tosh's name. And he ends up being allowed into Aslan's country because Aslan says all of these things, if they were done for good, they're done for me. That's the theology that I really like, that even if this person is doing something and not necessarily believing here in Aslan, but in God, but if they're doing good and if they're honestly like trying their best to make good in the world and do good for people, and they're not being selfish and bad, then they still go to heaven or Aslan's country, as you will. I like that theology. And I want to see if Lewis has more of that type of thing in his nonfiction, or if that's just something he went with for the children's fantasy world, or what. But yeah, other than that, the Calormene people are pretty bad in here. And what's really, really bad in this one is that the dwarfs use a term to refer to them that I would consider a racial slur. And obviously I'm not going to say it, but they use it a lot. And now the dwarves are not good people in this book. The dwarves, they all say, we're for the dwarves. The dwarves are for the dwarves. They're not doing anything to help anybody else out. And yeah, they don't believe in Aslan anymore. They are not considering themselves a part of Narnia. Therefore, the dwarves. So they're not supposed to be good, but it's still really, really uncomfortable for them to just be blatantly using a racial slur. And now I was reading this series, I mean, A, for the nostalgia and to like actually remember what happened in the later books, but also to, as I was reading, I was thinking about how I would read this to my children. And you know, there's stuff in the other books that's like not great because it was the 1950s. The obvious Orientalism and racism of the horse and his boy. There's some sexism that we're going to talk about here. But for all of those, I was like, okay, this is a conversation I could have with my kid. You know, we read the chapter and then we talk about how, okay, so you know, this was written in the 1950s and people had some prejudices and here's why this is not great and stuff like that. For this, I was just like, what do I do with this? Do I skip over the word and pretend it's not there? Do I replace it with something that's not as bad? What do I do? Do I have a conversation with my child about racial slurs? What do I do? So that, I still don't know what I do. I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it because it's not coming anytime soon. But yeah, so that's there. That's a thing. So I mentioned that I think it's really good to read this not too long after you've read The Horse and His Boy, whereas the chronological order would have you reading The Horse and His Boy third and then this book several books later. The reason that I say that is because of the talking horses. There is a moment in this book with the talking horses that is absolutely heartbreaking. And like having that connection with Bree and Hwin, I think really makes, like, because it would be horrifying no matter what. It's talking animals dying. That is just terrible. But to have it just coming off of actually two books where talking horses play a huge role. We've got The Horse and His Boy with Bree and Hwin, but we also have Fledge in The Magician's Nephew, who is a flying talking horse. He is a horse that came in from our world with a cab driver, and Aslan makes him first into a talking horse and then into a winged horse. So to have these very important talking horse characters in the two books preceding this makes the moment absolutely devastating. Here, I'll read it for you because why not? Halloween people had the horses tied up because they were using them for labor, and the mice have gone and freed them. And this is in the midst of battle. Boom, boom, ba-boom went the horrible drum. Then another sound began to mix with it. Listen, said Jewel, and then look, said Farsight. A moment later, there was no doubt what it was. With a thunder of hooves, with tossing heads, widened nostrils, and waving manes, over a score of talking horses of Narnia came charging up the hill. The gnawers and nibblers had done their work. Poggin the dwarf and the children opened their mouths to cheer, but that cheer never came. Suddenly, the air was full of the sound of twanging bowstrings and hissing arrows. It was the dwarfs who were shooting, and for a moment Jill could hardly believe her eyes. They were shooting the horses. Dwarfs are deadly archers. Horse after horse rolled over. Not one of those noble beasts ever reached the king. I told you the dwarves suck in this book, but that devastated me. To have just had these two books where we really come to love these talking horses, and to then hear that this is how the talking horses get wiped out, I had emotions about it. And so this is just yet another reason why I think the publication order is a better reading order, because you have that closer to the last battle, and it is fresh in your mind that you love Bree and Hwin and Fledge. And it's traumatizing. And you know what? If you're gonna make your kids read this book, you might as well traumatize them all the way. The final thing that I want to talk about is what's kind of known as the problem of Susan and the sexism of Chronicles of Narnia. So We learn that Susan is no longer a friend of Narnia in this book. When everybody else comes, so Diggory and Polly and Peter and Lucy and Edmund and Eustace and Jill all come to Narnia's aid when they realize something's wrong, and Susan does not. And this is what is said regarding it. Because Tyrion, who, knows all the ancient history, asks, "Where's Queen Susan?" "My sister Susan," answered Peter shortly and gravely, "is no longer a friend of Narnia." "Yes," said Eustace. "Whenever you've tried to get her to come and talk about Narnia or do anything about Narnia, she says, 'What wonderful memories you have. Fancy you're still thinking about all those funny games we used to play when we were children.'" "Oh, Susan," said Jill. "She's interested in nothing nowadays except nylons and lipstick and invitations. She's always was a jolly sight too keen on being grown up." "Grown up indeed," said the Lady Polly. "I wish she would grow up. She wasted all her school time wanting to be the age she is now, and she'll waste all the rest of her life trying to stay that age. Her whole idea is to race on to the silliest time of one's life as quick as she can, and then stop there as long as she can." So this has earned Lewis some criticism for being sexist. People think that Susan is coming into her own as a woman. She is beginning to like boys and be interested in her looks. And so then she's left out of Narnia for having sexuality and basically being a girl. A lot of modern authors have taken issue with this, including Philip Pullman. Also, J.K. Rowling, not that we care about her opinion, but... And then Neil Gaiman wrote a short story called The Problem of Susan about this very thing that features a woman whose whole family has died in a train crash. And that is what this issue has come to be known as, The Problem of Susan, which is a perfectly good name for it. Now, there is sexism in the Chronicles of Narnia. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lucy and Susan want to join the battle, or at least Lucy does. And Aslan says something about, "No. War is even uglier when women join in." It's like, okay. Like, the women never fight, really. Susan is an amazing archer, but she cries every time she has to actually kill something or someone. So there's that. There's also this part in The Silver Chair. C.S. Lewis is very critical of the school Eustace and Jill go to. Like about how it lacks discipline and they're teaching them things that just aren't good. And he's like very specific to point out that the head of the school is a woman. Like, it's a very pointed, the head was a woman, by the way, or something like that. And it's like, it's a little sus. I won't lie. Again, it's the 1950s. I don't know what to tell you. But I actually don't think that The Problem of Susan is one of sexism. So I think this actually has more to do with the idea in Christianity that we as Christians should be in the world, but not of it. So yes, you live in this world, but you are not of this world. You are not like the other people and caring about just worldly things. You are looking to a higher power and a higher ideal. Susan has turned away from Narnia. She's dismissed it as pretend. And instead, she turns to what would be the worldly things for a young woman in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Makeup, getting invitation from boys, and fashion. So is she a stereotypical girl? Sure, yeah. But I don't think she's being left out because she likes guys or wants to be pretty. She's being left out because she's turned her back on Narnia and is making the things of the world more important than Narnia. We also have to remember that C.S. Lewis actually said that he did not think that Susan would be left out of Aslan's country forever. So yes, everybody she loves dies in a train crash and goes on to Aslan's country, la-di-da, and she's left alone. Traumatizing. Traumatizing. However, he actually said in several letters to fans that he did not think she would be left out forever. He thought that there was very well a chance for her to make her way to Aslan's country. He actually said, though, that he didn't want to write that book because it would be too much of a grown-up novel than what he wanted to write, but he did welcome fans to write their own stories about it. So that's not a children's novel. And I can see where if he really wants to write children's novels and doesn't want to write grown-up novels, he wouldn't want to write that because that is not a children's novel. This is barely a children's novel. So I can see why he would leave Susan where he left her. It's also important to note that Lewis's journey with Face is closest to Susan. So Lewis was raised as a Christian when he was a child, and he became an atheist, and then he came back to religion later in life. Which, if we, use the believing in Narnia is being a Christian allegory, for lack of a better term, then yeah, that's exactly what Susan has done. She believed as a child. She turned away for her own reasons. And he does think she can come back. So I do not think excluding Susan comes from a place of sexism. I think that it's just a very real reality that he's looking at, that some people turn away from their faith. Is it sad? Yes. I think the character that he picked for that is Susan because she is always wanting to be a little more grown up. She's always very hesitant to kind of believe in magic. When Lucy says she sees Aslan and Prince Caspian, she doesn't believe her. Like, the hints are there the whole time that this is going to happen. So in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, she's gone off to America with her parents because they think it'll give her, like, opportunities, and the kids have to stay home alone with their horrible aunt and uncle. Like, there's always been hints of that. So yes, there is sexism in this book series. Most definitely. I just don't actually think that's part of it. I think C.S. Lewis is doing something completely different there. So that is the last battle. My least favorite. It still gets 4 stars just because of the emotions that it made me feel and the hope of the ending, but definitely not my favorite of the series. So that is all of the Chronicles of Narnia. I ultimately had such a lovely time revisiting this series. I'm so glad that I did, and that I got all these matching color illustrated versions, because I only had those of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Magician's Nephew. My other ones were just mass market paperbacks. I got these for myself as a little treat for finishing my prospectus. So I'm so glad that I came back. It was a joy to reread. I'm now, remember, what, 4 out of? Yeah, like 4 out of 7 books I didn't remember at all. So, it was just an absolute joy. So, let me know down in the comments below. Have you read Narnia? What are your thoughts? Do you agree or disagree with some of my interpretations? If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe so that you can see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.